Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to be talking about the energetics of trauma. I'm going to be doing a few videos on this. And while I am calling it the energetics of trauma, I would understand that anybody could benefit from this, whether or not they've experienced something that could be called trauma or not. The reason simply that I'm calling it that is just because in cases of trauma, energetically, there tends to be more fracturing or sort of exacerbation of symptoms. But most of us, even without trauma, have experienced some of the imbalances that I'm talking about. Just they won't be as dominant as they would be in cases of overwhelming stress or trauma. So let's talk about something that should be a bit better known or a bit more well known outside of, kind of very specific communities. And that is talking about the energetics of the right and left side of the body and the energetics of the right and left side of the brain. So, to sort of start things out, I will say that one of the confusing things when I'm talking about this is that when I'm talking about the right brain, it has to do with the energetics of the left side of the body. When I'm talking about the left brain, it has to do with the right side of the body. And so it's just basically a cross pattern. And so let's get into things by talking about the left and right sides of the brain. If we were to create a map, what one side is and the other side is, the left side of the brain is known as our analytical side. It is the side that excels with logic, with what could be seen. It is also the part of ourselves that kind of gets on with things, sort of grits our teeth and gets through it, or whatever expression you want to put in there. When we experience trauma, when we experience stress, this is the part of ourselves that continues on despite what is going on. It gets stuff done, it goes to work, it experiences all of those things that life has to offer. And we should be happy when we have a part of ourselves that can continue on. Even if we've experienced childhood trauma, we are going to have a part of ourselves that goes through stages of development, just like a child should, that has friends, goes out and socializes, goes through all of those markers of childhood and adolescence and early adulthood, even if another part of ourselves remains sort of stuck in trauma. And so this left brain part of ourselves can be considered the masculine polarity. And so when I'm talking about the masculine and feminine polarity, I will make very clear that I am not talking about male versus female. We all have a left and right side of the body, a left and right side of the brain. We all have masculine and feminine polarities within us. And so, remembering this, if I call the left brain and the right side kind of the general of our body, the adult portion of our body, and what that means is simply the part that can get through things and get things done no matter the cost. We can have an understanding of the function as well as some of the imbalances that happen in the right side of our body. If there is an imbalance in the masculine polarity, so the left side of the brain, right side of the body, there are a number of physical, emotional, and spiritual expressions of this. The first is very practical. It is somebody who is so dominantly left brain that they refuse to acknowledge, experience any emotions, anything that might be described as mystical, anything outside of the realm of scientific materialism. They will be the type of personality that will keep on going even if their body is screaming at them to stop. So, for a period of time, I worked in a clinic that had um, Olympians and people that were professional athletes, and they would tell me these horrific stories about needing to keep on going despite for like all these horrible things happening, like hernias and even broken bones and, sprained ankles, like all of that sort of stuff. And so we can consider this part of ourselves to be that inner Olympian. But what happens after time is that if you're so dominantly in this, um, what will happen is that our inner Olympian will become more and more depleted because they keep on going despite their body, despite their energy level, telling them to stop. They continually feel the need to produce, to do, to show themselves, to keep things going, even if everything in them is screaming to stop. And so, on a physical level, people who have a tendency to be imbalanced on the right side in this way, they're too dominant in the masculine polarity, they will experience pain in the right side of their body. If you look at them, there typically is going to be a lot of tension in the right hip. There's going to be pain in the right head, right leg, right foot. You will notice if you look at them with their shoulders that there's going to be a shoulder imbalance. Basically, I'm going to exacerbate it, but kind of like this, or with both of their shoulders like this. And that is because what happens when we are so dominantly using an energy without restoring it is that it becomes depleted. And in energetics, what happens when we become depleted due to overuse is that things become stuck and painful instead of flowing and well and healthy. The other way that the masculine polarity can be out of balance is through what would be known as a deficiency pattern in energetics. So instead of overusing, it would be underutilizing. And so somebody who experiences this is going to be entirely right brain. They will not pay attention to logic, to authority. They will often be stuck in kind of a childlike state of being. They are the type of person that's going to be head in the clouds, but no shoes on the ground, so to speak. So they're going to be ungrounded, disconnected from reality. Um, and often, kind of get into a lot of theories and thoughts that perpetuate a disconnect from reality, from themselves, from the world, from spirit. Even if they feel like they're sort of engaging with those things, what they are doing is serving the purpose of disconnecting them further. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we can be the most spiritual channel, oracle, divine being that has ever lived. But there does need to be discernment, logic there, a pairing of the two sides instead of them operating separately. And so somebody who is in this state of kind of head in the clouds or openly sort of childlike state of defying authority um, will often report issues with their left side, but their right side will feel numb, or they won't be able to feel into it at all, or there'll be sort of like arthritic type pain. where it isn't this big stuck muscle, but it's more like degeneration, lack of small energy flow going through that area of the body. So let's talk about the right brain and the left side of the body now. The right brain is associated with the feminine polarity. It is associated with intuition. It is associated with feeling. It is associated with the dark aspects of our being. It is also, if you go deeply into it, associated with the other. And what that means is that how we connect to the divine, how we connect to spirit is through the feminine. It is through feeling, it is through a felt sense of things, it is through the gateway of our emotions, it is the gateway of the feminine polarity, which has to do with earth and darkness and death and a lot of things that people don't wish to make contact with. And rightfully so. They can be scary, but I will also share that they can very much be worked with and through, and people can have an experience an authentic connection to, in a non-frightening way, to their own feelings, to their own bodies, to their own nature, and ultimately to the divine. And so, right side of the brain, I've already talked about what it is associated with. Um, and so the imbalance with this is that what happens when we experience trauma or stress that is too overwhelming for us to handle at the time is that a part of us gets stuck in that stage of development. So let's say we've experienced overwhelming stress or trauma as an infant or at age 2. There is going to be a part of our consciousness stuck at that state. And what happens is that energetically, spiritually, that, left brain part of ourselves, the right side of our body moves on, but the left side, the feeling part of ourselves does not. We become locked in the feelings, the experiences, and the beliefs of that state. And so the biggest imbalance that comes from the right brain is people being stuck in varying stages of development. Their consciousness is essentially split because part of their consciousness has moved on and part of their consciousness has experienced a fracture at whatever ages they experienced that trauma or overwhelming circumstances. Um, so somebody may have, uh, 5 parts of themselves that are fractured. Another person might have 500. It just depends on the person. And this gets even more complicated when we go into spiritual work, because in spiritual work versus psychology, there is an understanding that we do not come into this world a blank slate. And so energies that very much inform our existence and inform the left side of our bodies and the feeling parts of ourselves, um, our ancestral traumas, ancestral history, past life trauma, in utero history, in utero trauma, um, and a lot of different other energies of place and time, like basically what sort of world we were born into, what time, what place, what events were going on in history, what sort of spirits or energies on the land were supporting us or not. It gets very, very complicated. But um, the basic thought is that we can emerge into this world in a basic state of okayness, a basic state of, okay, let's go, let's live our lives, or we can emerge into this world due to a variety of factors, most notably in utero experiences, past life and ancestral experiences, not really wanting to be here, wondering what the point is, or feeling already disconnected or sort of fragmented. And so there are a couple of imbalances that we can talk about for the left side of the body. right side of the brain. The first is exactly what I was sharing, is that parts of ourselves are stuck in development. What that looks like for the person is the reoccurrence of the feelings and emotions from those parts of ourselves that are stuck at that age or at that point of trauma, that point of consciousness. And most often we don't recognize where these are coming from. We assume that they are present day. We assume if we are experiencing panic or fear or anger, that it is something our current, present, everyday self sort of consciousness. If we're willing to start doing healing or start understanding concepts like this, we can understand that a lot of the emotions that we experience that come up, especially really overwhelming ones, do not arise from the present moment. They are memories, feelings, experiences that are arising from the past. One of the things that was a big aha for me, and maybe it will be for some of you as well, or maybe most of you know this, is that I always thought of flashbacks as something that would contain a specific visual, have a specific memory, have a specific story. And about 10 years ago, maybe 15, something like that. Ages get hazy. um, but I started understanding and reading about uh, implicit memories and emotional flashbacks. And so one of the books that I suggest, one of the books that really drove this home for me is a more recent book, which is Pete Walker's book on complex PTSD. Um, but there are also other books and resources out there that I first started learning this about. He just provided the language at that point. I think it's less than 10 years old. Anyway, it's a good book, but um, he there are some times that you can understand a concept already, but then somebody puts it into words in which you can really grasp it. And so what really struck me in there was his wording or language around emotional flashbacks. And these are typically a flood or experience of implicit memories. So they don't necessarily have a place or time or story associated with them, but they do have emotion associated with them. And so, what this most often will present as is a flood of emotion. And so, a flood of terror, panic, anger, anxiety, and then all of the survival responses that I'm going to talk about in later videos: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flaccid. These are all responses that we get stuck in when a part of our consciousness gets stuck due to trauma or overwhelm. And so in our normal lives, we may be going along and something triggers us or something upsets us, or we read or see something, and then all of a sudden we have this implicit memory, this flood of emotions that arises. And again, most often what happens is that we associate it with the present moment rather than understanding it is from the past. And so on a physical level, people tend to not feel their left side. If they really pay attention to it, if they really draw attention to it, they might feel a bit of numbness or stiffness. Um, but one of the imbalances with this part of ourselves is that people tend to be numb to their emotions, or they tend to build walls up between themselves and their emotions. And so this can look a variety of different ways in the left side imbalance. It might be somebody who is complaining about their right side, but when you ask them about their left, they have no awareness of it whatsoever. It might be somebody who is trying to, lift weights or go for a run or something like that, and they notice a difference in their gait between left and right. Um, it can also be somebody emotionally. This can present a couple of different ways. This person may be, I don't want to say overly emotional, but kind of heavily neurotic, somebody who at the, slightest provocation bursts into tears or gets angry quite quickly, goes into a state of panic. So that experience of not only experiencing emotions that we all have, but somebody who feels deeply. And I will be the first to say that there is nothing wrong with feeling deeply. But if somebody is feeling deeply because there is an experience or expression of unhealed stuff, that is going to look a bit different than somebody who is willing to cry or experience their emotions because they watched a sad TV show. The best thought I have for this is asking what age you are. This is a self-inquiry question. I offer it in a variety of my books, including the Body Deva and Shadow Workbook. But if we are willing to feel into our emotions and understand them, and we feel a large amount of grief at feeling something, we can understand that and sit with that grief and understand, okay, all of this grief feels like it is coming from the present day situation, or we may feel like, okay, some of this grief is coming from the past, or all of it is coming from the past. So the sort of overly sensitive person who may be at kind of the mercy of their emotions because they have so many unprocessed, unintegrated emotions and experiences from stuck consciousness that are stuck in the past. The other way that this looks and is somebody who is cut off from their emotions overall. And so this is going to be different than sort of the stoic, unfeeling, masculine, like toughen up sort of person, although it can have those elements to it. This is most likely going to be somebody who is deeply feeling or sensitive or describes themselves that way, that because at an early age they noticed that other people were not deeply feeling or sensitive as them, or they were in a household where there was no emotions at all. Um, that they built a wall within themselves. And so this is kind of the ultimate separation between between yin and yang, masculine and feminine. And so what happens is that this person on the surface will appear very numb, robotic like, may even dissociate quite a bit, where they feel kind of empty or not present, but underneath that, like kind of below the trap door or sort of stuck in the basement, is a whole lot of feelings and emotions that they do not wish to experience or express. And so the complicating part of this is how the right and left brains can interact. And so the left brain can treat the right brain, the feminine, like a child. It may, the left brain in its general, like, let's go on with things, let's not feel, let's move forward at any cost, may view the right side, may view the left side, the emotional side, the feminine aspects of our being as childlike, as neurotic, as unwanted, as experiencing a whole lot of criticism, basically pushing that part of itself away as much as possible. And so the main tools that the left brain uses to do this are criticism, denial, and kind of distraction sort of things. And so this is where a large part of our inner critic comes from, is that this part of ourselves wishes to move on. And so its response to that is to try to tell the anything that is sort of locked in the feminine polarity to, um, you know, get over itself. And those of us who have experienced any type of trauma, who have experienced any type of emotion whatsoever, know that being told to get over things doesn't help. It doesn't help to ignore things, to deny things. There are so many spiritualities that are very locked in this dominant, masculine, right-sided perspective of things. Oh, just pretend that you've transcended anger or that you're not angry. Well, what happens to that anger is that it gets even angrier. It doesn't go anywhere. And so, what the left side tries to do, the feminine side, is tries to bring up all of these emotions, all of these intuitions, all of these experiences. And in most individuals, what is going to happen is a split between yin and yang, a split between masculine and feminine polarities, where their gnosis, their intuitions, their emotions will arise, and the masculine aspects of themselves, the right side, will be telling the left side of the body that these are not important, these are illogical, shut up, shut down, you should be over this. And this even furthers the divide, it furthers the split. And so what happens is that that sense of intuition and connection to the divine goes away, because if we don't listen to our intuition, um, it, it diminishes. That's just what happens. And the feminine, the aspects of feeling that are still stuck will desperately keep on trying to um, get the attention of the consciousness. And if they are not listened to, if they are not heard, if they are not expressed in a compassionate way, they will remain stuck. Because we can consider this with our own children, or maybe with just a random child. Like, okay, if you were actually talking to an inner 5-year-old, like if you were actually talking to a 5-year-old, hopefully most of us, if that 5-year-old were crying, wouldn't tell that 5-year-old that they have nothing to cry about and to shut up and to shut down. But we do this all to our inner 5-year-olds all the time. So there needs to be a shift there, even if we go outside of trauma. We have such conditioning that reveres the masculine polarity, that reveres logic above all else, scientific materialism above all else. And part of what is happening in our culture, in our world, is that there's this rise of the dark feminine, and with it, it is trying to shift things. But the way that it's trying to shift things is moving that pendulum too far into this sort of thought of like, let's not have any authority figures, let's not listen to science, let's not listen to anybody that has done substantial research or education. Let's move into anti-intellectualism, anti-logic sort of place. And there's an argument that sometimes pendulums need to swing in order to find, a good middle ground. Collectively, I do find that to be true. And so hopefully that will happen. But we are definitely living in an era of the dark, darkest childlike aspects of ourselves are screaming for attention, and doing it in a way in which they are showing their wounding rather than a healthy emotional expression sort of way. So in Chinese medicine, there is an interesting syndrome called husband and wife imbalance. And so this is essentially what I'm talking about. This is, a term that talks about primary yin and yang being separate, working separately from one another. How this appears is typically that as a Chinese medicine practitioner, one of the things that we do is feel the pulse because the pulse has different qualities that we look for that show what is going on in terms of imbalances and patterns in the body. It can get quite complicated. It's definitely an art form to be able to feel pulse and to feel it in a Chinese medicine capacity. But in terms of what's called a husband-wife imbalance, what typically happens is that the pulse on one side will be much stronger than the pulse on the other. So typically it's the pulse on the left wrist is much more prominent than the one on the right. And this shows a primary separation between yin and yang. And so that is essentially the end result of what I'm talking about here is that the masculine and the feminine polarities are essentially operating in their own sphere, or one is so dominant that the other one doesn't get to express itself at all. And so there becomes a separation in which those sides are not interacting, not talking to one another, not communicating. In an ideal system, in a state of balance, in a state of, spiritual awakening, we might call it, what happens is that the right side and the left side work together. Our emotions and intuitions require discernment. I always tell people, even if you are the most spiritual person around, you should only believe 97% of what comes through, because people who believe 100% of themselves, they're the ones that tend to go, pardon the language, they tend to go insane. They're the ones that tend to be severely imbalanced if you believe your own stuff all the way. And so all of our intuition, all of our feeling, we should be able to develop, we can develop resources for it. We can learn to feel it in a non-frightening way. We can learn to heal all of those stuck consciousness within ourselves so we can get to a point where we can feel and experience our creativity, our intuition, our connection to the divine in a way that feels quite flowing, quite freeing, and also have that energy arise and be met by the masculine polarity, which can offer it grounding, offer it sort of a container, offer it perspective, offer it that capacity to really have action and go out into the world. So essentially a structure for it. In talk about Kundalini awakening, there's always this imagery of Kundalini or spiritual awakening being like a flow, being essentially an ocean. And so we can think about this as like the flow of a river, but that river also requires, banks. It requires, places within itself, structure to show it where to flow, show it how to come out into the world. So somebody who is quite stuck in the right brain, left side of their body might have all of these feelings, intuitions, expressions, dreams, insights, but they cannot find their way out into the world because they have not engaged with the masculine polarity enough, the right side of the body enough, which would provide that structure and that activation and that plan to get it out into the world. So I hope that you found this interesting. I'm going to do a couple more videos talking about the energetic, spiritual, emotional aspects of survival mechanisms and energetic imbalances. And those will be coming hopefully soon.